Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me on this session. My name is Spencer Allingham, and I'm the Technical Director at Condusiv for Europe, Middle East and Africa. And today I want to cover one of the most overlooked causes of performance loss when running virtual Windows servers in Hyper-V, and more importantly, how you can easily fix the problem by installing our V-locity software on your Windows VMs. Now, I'll have a Q&A session at the end, so if you think of any questions as we're going through, please do feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and as I said, at the end I will do my very best to answer them all. And if any of this sounds like it's going to be interesting to you as we're going through, I've put a couple of handouts, again in the GoToWebinar window. You'll see there's a V-locity data sheet that you can download, and also one of the case studies from the University of Illinois. So feel free to download as well and have a read through. So with that said, let's start the presentation. Now, some of you may be thinking, goodness, I've never heard of Condusiv. Who are they? What right do they have to be talking about any of this stuff? Well, we're actually a 38-year-old software company. I think the 12th oldest software company in the world that's still going strong today. And throughout that 38-year lifetime, we've been the leading experts on file system optimization to give you additional performance and data throughput and so on. And as mentioned, I want to introduce you to our V-locity software, which is our patented storage I/O sequentialization and RAM caching technology that eliminates performance problems in virtual environments. Now, some of our software is OEM'd by some of the biggest players in the IT industry, and I'm sure you recognize the likes of Samsung, Fujitsu, HP, and so on. They actually use our technology to make their products run faster and stay running very fast. And we've actually sold over 100 million licenses worldwide and have a 90% footprint in the Fortune 500. So that's a bit about us. Our V-locity software has also been available for many years and is itself used by thousands of organizations all around the world, from small companies to large multinational enterprises, universities, government agencies, hospitals, and so on. Anyway, enough about us. Let's talk a bit about why you might want to consider taking a closer look at the V-locity software for your Hyper-V environment. Badly performing Hyper-V virtual machines can manifest in a number of different ways. You could, for example, have batch jobs or reports taking longer than they should, slow databases that can't process enough transactions per minute, applications that are taking longer than they should to respond. You might even have application timeouts, user complaints to the help desk, or even worse, customer complaints. As we rely more and more on our virtualized infrastructures, we really can't accept a situation where we're unable to get all of the performance that we've paid for when setting up our Hyper-V environments. As IT professionals, we really need to ensure that the maximum compute is available at all times, and especially during periods of peak load, and even more especially during the working day when users are more likely to be using our Hyper-V environments. So if you're seeing performance issues within your Hyper-V environment, there could be several causes. One of the most common when running Windows in Hyper-V virtual machines is related to the way Windows moves data to and from the storage layer. Generally, it's really, not as efficient as it could be or it should be. We've had customers purchase the V-locity software even after buying very expensive all-flash arrays, simply because they still needed more performance. A good example of that is that case study in the handout section for the University of Illinois. Other customers have been able to defer the purchase of that expensive next level storage solution simply because V-locity gave them so much more performance from the storage array that they already owned. The good news is that you can easily get better storage performance too, simply by installing the V-locity software on all your virtual machines. Not only will that deal with the inefficiencies in Windows, it will also introduce intelligent RAM caching for your read I/O traffic. Now, Before we can take a closer look at the vSphere software and how it works, it's important to understand what type of storage I/O traffic performs best with pretty much all types of storage that could underpin a Hyper-V environment, from spinning platter hard drives right up to flash or SSDs. There's a very good reason why storage manufacturers prefer to measure the performance of their storage with larger sequential reads, and that is that this type of storage I/O traffic allows a faster data transfer rate, measurable in megabytes per second. Basically, larger sequential storage transfers mean a fast data transfer rate, and that in turn means better performance for the workloads that you're running in your Hyper-V environment. Take a look at the test results on this slide for an NVMe connected SSD and a spinning hard drive. Of course, the read and write speeds are faster on the SSD, no surprises there, but what about when the storage I/O sizes are small? Smaller storage I/Os mean less data can be read and written per second. And that's okay if you're actually reading or writing only 2K or 4K of data. But, and this is an important but, what many people don't realize is that the Windows OS inside your virtual machines will often take a larger write and will split it into many more, much smaller I/Os as it sends the data out to storage. The net effect, of course, is that data is written more slowly than it should be, and this can also slow down the speed at which that data can be read later on. It can have a very real and very negative performance effect on storage-heavy virtualized workloads like SQL and other databases, busy file servers, business information systems, ERP systems, document management systems, and so on. Now, if you're running any of those, how often have users complained about performance? Traditionally, as IT professionals, we're taught that bad performance is combated by buying more expensive storage hardware, more spindles, a tray of flash or SSD, faster switches, and so on. But what many IT professionals don't realize is that the Windows operating system itself can actually be tuned and helped to prevent or avoid the slower data transfer rates that these split I/O situations cause. The easiest way, of course, is just by simply installing the vSphere software on all of the Windows VMs. I should also mention that installing vSphere on your VMs will only take a few minutes of your time, and it won't cause any disruption whatsoever to the live running workloads. There are no reboots required to make it work, no complicated configuration. Really, you just install the software. It's that simple. And for those who have a larger number of virtual machines, vSphere comes with a management console, again, very easy to use, from which you can install the software across your network, again, in a matter of minutes. In addition to sequentializing storage I/O traffic for greater throughput of data, vSphere provides an intelligent RAM cache that will allow your applications to be served hot reads at the speed of RAM instead of the speed of the disk storage layer and the network connecting it to the servers if you're using a SAN. When you consider that server-side RAM is roughly 10 times faster than a lot of SSD storage solutions, you can see how that would also be beneficial to the performance of the workloads that you're running in those Windows VMs. It gets requested data to the applications more quickly, and at the same time, your storage layer is working less hard because it has fewer read I/Os to deal with. The cache size is automatic and dynamically sized, and vSphere will never compete for RAM with anything else you have running on a VM. It will only ever use some of the memory that's being left idle or unused, and because the cache is sitting inside each Windows VM, it provides the shortest I/O path possible to get those read I/Os completed as quickly as possible. By installing vSphere on all of your Windows virtual machines, you'll quickly change from this situation where you have small storage traffic that gets further randomized by a blender effect as it passes through the physical host to this, where the storage traffic is much more sequential and reduced, so that you can now actually get the performance that you paid for when purchasing your Hyper-V environment and its associated hardware. Even if you have the fastest storage array in the world, does it really make sense to allow the virtualized Windows operating system to split storage I/O traffic, dampen its performance, and really prevent you from using it to its full potential? Of course not. That wouldn't make sense. Now, I mentioned earlier that we have thousands of V-locity customers all over the world. We also have quite a few customer case studies available to read on our website at condusiv.com. Bell Mobility on the bottom left is a great example. They're a telecoms company in Canada who installed our V-locity software, which promptly replaced their small random storage I/O traffic with larger sequentialized reads and writes. And this gave them SQL report queries that were just simply 3 times faster. No additional hardware required. All they had to do was just install the V-locity software on all their VMs. There were no reboots, no SQL code changes, and no disruption. Just quite simply the ability to process more work in the same amount of time using the infrastructure that they already owned. Another great example is Hancock Regional Hospital. After installing V-locity on all their VMs, they found their patient records loading 3 times faster. So let me briefly summarize what we've been through. Firstly, small random reads and writes to the storage mean less data can be transferred each second. And that can be very bad for the Windows OS, application performance, and your Hyper-V virtualization initiative. It can bottleneck the virtual environment, leading to less productivity and more user or customer complaints, especially at periods of peak load. Secondly, V-locity solves performance problems in Hyper-V virtual environments by sequentializing writes as data is being written for greater data transfer rates, and it introduces RAM caching to really boost storage-hungry applications like SQL, SharePoint, Sage ERP if you're running that on-prem, Microsoft Dynamics, busy file servers, and many more. Finally, V-locity is just a piece of software, so it can be installed in any Windows VM being hosted in a Hyper-V environment. As long as you have Windows VMs running Windows Server 2008 R2 or later, or if you have a VDI environment, Windows 7 or later, you can install the V-locity software. And as I mentioned, there are no code changes required, no reboots, no disruption to live running workloads, or more importantly, your users. If you want to try the V-locity software for yourself, you can download a copy free right now. In fact, rather than take my word for any of this, I would much rather you install it on all of your VMs and really see what difference it can make to your own virtual environment. As a couple of tips from someone who's installed this software in many customer environments, I would suggest that you wait 24 to 48 hours after installing to check the results. That will give V-locity's telemetry algorithms a chance to learn a bit about the workloads that you're running in each machine and start figuring out what the hot blocks of data are that should be in the RAM cache. Also, try to leave enough RAM free to cache with effectively, especially on your more important, busy, or VIP servers. If you can leave 16 gigabytes of RAM free, that would be enough to really make the performance fly. But if you can't afford that, leave 8 gig free. And if you can't afford 8 gig, leave 4 gig free. Even that is enough to make a difference, but if you go much smaller than that, you'll probably be limiting the results that you would otherwise get. And if you'd like technical help with the software, get the Condusiv contact details for your region from the Contact Us page at condusiv.com. Let us know and we can quickly get you hooked up with a technical engineer to help with installation, configuring for best results, and even evaluating the results with you. We'll help you as much or as little as you feel appropriate. All you need to do is just let us know. And to say thank you for your time today and for your interest in the V-locity software, we're going to send you a single full V-locity server license worth £400 along with the 30-day trialware. And that's yours to keep running on one of your machines even after the trialware has expired. I would strongly recommend, though, that it's worth installing the V-locity trialware on all of your virtual machines when testing, or as many VMs as you can that share the same backend storage. That way, you'll be able to see the full power of the software. You'll be decreasing and optimizing as much of that storage traffic as possible. So I hope that's been useful. Let's see if we've had any questions come through. Now we've got a couple, but if you think of any more, feel free to use that Q&A box in the webinar window, and I'll answer those as well. The first one is from Brian. He says, "Is V-locity installed on the host and the VMs?" Okay, good question. So in a HyperV environment, as I'm sure you all know, you have your physical Windows server with a HyperV role, and it's hosting a number of Windows virtual machines. My recommendation is to install the V-locity software into the guest Windows virtual machines. That's where you're going to get the most bang for buck. And there are several reasons for that. One, it puts the RAM cache as close to the applications as possible that are requesting to read data, so that provides the shortest I/O path. And secondly, it's at that layer where writes get split as they're then being sent on down to the storage layer. If you try and prevent those writes from being split down at the HyperV hypervisor layer, well, you can't. It's too late. They were already split inside the VMs. So I would suggest installing into the Windows virtual machines is the right layer to put it. Now, that being said, you can install V-locity onto a Hyper-V host. It is technically possible. I've done that on a few edge cases with people who are running things like a VDI environment where you might have several virtual machines trying to read the same data from the storage. And if you want any assistance with that, then feel free to get in touch, and they'll put you through to me, and I can certainly help you with that. But for most use cases, get it into the Windows virtual machines. That's where you're going to see the biggest return. So I hope that answers that. Now let's see, what other questions have we got here? Right, excellent. So Paul says, did you run the Atto disk benchmark test with and without V-locity so that we can see the difference? And you know what? I figured this question would come up, and yes, I actually did. Let's see here. Here we go. So let's get onto the right slide here. So I didn't include these slides as part of the main presentation because I felt it's unrealistic in the real world outside of a lab test to expect that all of the read I/O traffic would be satisfied by V-locity's RAM cache, as is the case with this lab test. But if you could satisfy even just 25% or more of the hot reads at a transfer rate measured in gigabytes per second rather than megabytes per second, really that can only be beneficial to OS and application performance. It would also mean that those read IOs satisfied from the RAM cache represent less work for the storage layer. So, as you can see here, without V-locity, the read transfer rate of the NVMe connected SSD was maxing out at around 3.2 gigabytes per second. That's this column here. The read transfer rate of the spinning hard drive was maxing out at around 224 megabytes per second. With V-locity satisfying all of the read IO traffic at the speed of RAM, the read transfer rate now maxes out at well over 11 gigabytes per second. So the cached reads are being served up more than 3 times faster than even the NVMe connected SSD could do by itself on both storage types. Now, if you have any kind of storage bottleneck in your Hyper-V environment, that's got to be good news. So I hope that answers that. Now, let's see here if I can go back to the Q&A page. There we go. Now, Christos says, does Velocity 3 support vSphere? Now, Christos, Velocity 3 is very, very old and wouldn't have been tested and certified with today's version of vSphere. I would recommend that you get Velocity 7, which is the right one to use for today's environments. Velocity 3, goodness, that's going back, must be 5, 6, possibly even 7 years. I hope you understand things have moved on a little bit since Velocity 3. The main reason why I say you use the current version, which we're going to send you, by the way, you'll get a copy of this, is that each version of our software is actually certified by Microsoft before it gets released to the public. We regularly go to something in the US, I think it's in Seattle, where it's called a Microsoft Plug Fest, where we get together with a lot of the programmers from a lot of other companies that use storage filter drivers. So these are people like Kaspersky and Symantec and other antivirus companies, people producing backup software and so on. And basically in a Microsoft lab environment with Microsoft engineers, we all test our software with each other to ensure compatibility. And as a result of that, Microsoft are kind enough to certify our software themselves before it gets released to the public. And I suspect strongly that Velocity 3, because it's so old, won't have been certified with today's version of vSphere. Now, vSphere, of course, is a VMware technology. And I know that this presentation has been very much tailored towards Hyper-V, but yes, you can use Velocity with Hyper-V. In fact, I've got another slide which I tucked away at the end here that really shows you where the Velocity software is intended to sit, up here in the guest Windows operating system. And because we're doing all of our operations at this layer inside the guest Windows VM, it actually doesn't matter if your hypervisor is from VMware, as in your case, Christos, or if it's Hyper-V or Citrix Zen Server or KVM running over Red Hat, or even Oracle VirtualBox. It really doesn't matter what the hypervisor is. As long as the hypervisor and the backend storage is compatible with the Windows operating system running in the VM, which of course it will be compatible with our software. So Christos, I know that was a very long answer, but I hope that answers the question properly for you. But yeah, don't use Velocity 3. Use the version that we're going to send you, which is Velocity 7, because that will have been certified. Right, now we've got another question coming here from Dale. He says, is there any future planning for this software to support any Linux distributions? That's a great question, Dale, and it's one I get asked quite a lot, believe it or not. We do have something on our longer term roadmap, which will be very much like Velocity for Linux. I think initially we're looking at supporting Red Hat and some flavors of that. I don't know at this stage when it's going to be released to the public. So I know that's probably not what you wanted to hear, but yes, we do have something on our longer term roadmap, but we don't have it ready for public consumption just yet, I'm afraid. Now, that being said, and I don't know if this is true for you, Dale, or not, but maybe some other people attending this will ring true. If you have a virtual environment where you have a mixture of Windows machines and Linux machines as well, and they're all sharing the same hypervisor storage or sharing the same backend storage, if you put the Velocity software into the Windows part of the estate, What's it going to do there? It's going to typically reduce the storage I/O traffic coming out of those Windows machines somewhere between 30 to 50%. A 30 to 50% reduction is a good customer average. Some people get more than that, but the effect that has on that shared backend storage is that it's now working less hard, it's doing less work. You've reduced storage I/O queue depths, you've helped to reduce storage latency, and this additional I/O headroom that's being handed back to the environment, well, the Linux machines will be able to take advantage of that additional I/O headroom, even without the V-locity software being installed on them, because simply the Windows part of the estate is now taxing the storage layer less. So Dale, I hope that makes sense and is a reasonable answer. It'd be interesting to know if you do have a mixture of Linux and Windows, or whether you're just purely Linux. Now, let's see. Sarah says, is it safe to use with SQL Server? Good question. Yes, it absolutely is. That's the short answer. And in fact, we got certification from Microsoft, which I think I've got a little certification logo on the front page here. There we go. So this logo here, this Microsoft SQL Server I/O Reliability Certification. This is Microsoft certifying V-locity for use with SQL Server. And in order to get this, we ran tests with Microsoft engineers it was SQL Server 2016, and the tests were run in their Azure cloud platform. And not only were we able to jump through all of the hoops necessary to prove that we don't negatively or adversely affect the I/O subsystem that an environment has to provide for SQL as defined by Microsoft themselves, the testing also showed roughly a 30% increase in the number of SQL transactions that could be processed per minute. So, that's again another great example of the software allowing an environment like SQL to just simply be able to process a greater amount of work in the same amount of time over the same infrastructure. So yes, it is absolutely safe to use with SQL Server. It doesn't affect things like ACID compliance or anything like that. We're not bypassing the Windows write driver in any way. We're just adding an extra layer of intelligence to it so that it can make better choices about how and where to write to the NTFS layer, so that everything below that point, if I bring up the layer again, oops, just killed the slide deck, sorry about that. Let me bring that back up here. There we go. So because we're allowing the Windows operating system to make better choices about how it writes to the NTFS layer, everything below that point benefits by receiving less work to do, and the work that it does receive is optimized into these larger chunks of data that can be read and written in a more sequential manner, and larger sequential reads and writes means more data can be transferred per second. So I hope that makes sense and answers that. And I think that's all of the questions that we've had through. I'll leave it a moment or two to see if any other questions pop up that I can answer. Please do feel free to grab a copy of those handouts. As I mentioned at the beginning, you've got the V-locity data sheet, which is a pretty concise overview of the software and its features and the value proposition. There's that case study from the University of Illinois. And if you want any more case studies, go to condusiv.com. There's a lot there. There should be a case study there that's pretty similar to the type of environment that you're running and the type of applications that you're using. And yeah, remember, if you have any users complaining about performance, or if you have any applications that are becoming tough to support from a performance point of view in HyperV or VMware environments, give the software a try. Use that V-locity trialware that we're going to send to you and put it onto as many Windows machines as you can. I promise you, it won't disrupt any live running workloads. And the only change that you're going to see is that you can now process more work in the same amount of time using that existing infrastructure that you already own. So I don't think any further questions have come through. So hopefully I've done a reasonable job of explaining this. I appreciate very much your time, everybody, that you've given me today. Please feel free to get in touch with us. As I mentioned, the contact us page at condusiv.com has all of the contact details for your particular region. You can get in touch with me directly if you use the contact details for EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and I would love to hear from you. So thank you again, everybody. Have a very good rest of day. Take care, everyone.